Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for being here with us today on Cinema Recap. Today, we're going to check out that action horror sci-fi film, Priest. Spoilers ahead. It's a dark and stormy night, and we find ourselves at Solamira Hive, the home of vampires. Searching out this hive are a band of warriors known collectively as priests. And their leader, well, his name is Priest too, which is kind of confusing. The priests are on the hunt for the queen vampire, and although one of the members of this party, Black Hat, voices his concern, Priest tells them to push on, which they do, only to be ambushed by a swarm of hungry vampires. The priests have no choice but to flee as they're picked off one by one until finally it's just Priest and Black Hat. They reach the exit. Priest dives for it, but Black Hat gets grabbed by the vampires. Priest tries to pull him out, but no good. All he can do is watch his friend get gobbled up by a group of hungry vamps. From there, we cut to a pretty cool animation scene that explains to us the history of this vampire-populated world that we find ourselves in. Essentially, vampires and man have always existed in this world, although these aren't the vampires that you know. No Edward Cullen seducing teenage girls. Instead, they're more like rabid dogs, with super strength and a real tendency towards drinking blood and killing humans. The animation explains that for centuries, man and vampire were at war against one another, and such was the destruction of this war that it nearly led to the death of every human on the planet. In order to survive, humans were forced to move into great big walled cities that were run by the church, who promised them God's protection from the vamps. But it still didn't do too much good. And we see history progressing through time as vampires and man struggled on both sides. But then the priests were born. These were special men touched by God, given superpowers by their faith, and then taught to fight the vampires. With these priests, mankind was able to drive back and defeat the vampire hordes, decimating them such that their population dropped down to the hundreds, all but wiping them out. Unfortunately, once the war was over with and won, the priests became kind of irrelevant. They turned to pariahs in their society, pushed to the side and completely forgotten by the church and people who they saved less than a generation before. We cut forward a generation or two now, where we find ourselves on a desert-like farm out in the middle of nowhere. The owner of this farm is Owen, and he has a loving wife and a beautiful daughter, Lucy. Currently, the three are sitting down for dinner as Owen chastises Lucy for going into town too often, presumably to speak with boys.
Someone here needs a life outside this outpost.
Their arguing doesn't go on for too much longer though, as pretty soon they feel a tremble on the ground, and then the house starts to shake. Owen runs to the window, where he spies a horde of vicious vampires charging right for the house. He screams for Lucy to hide, while he grabs a futuristic-looking gun off the wall. Lucy's mom opens a trapdoor in the middle of the room, and they shuffle Lucy down into it.
Whatever you hear, don't scream.
She doesn't scream, even as she's forced to listen to the vampires overhead tearing through her family like hyenas would a carcass. Lucy listens as the noise dies down, as footsteps move toward the trapdoor. And as the trapdoor flies open to reveal, well, we don't see exactly what it is, but Lucy does. And when she realizes that this might be the end of her, she screams her head off. From there, we cut over to Cathedral City, looking like Blade Runner and Dark City had a baby. It's one of those cities where every single person looks to be oppressed or depressed, where the church rules with an iron fist, and where it just seems to be raining all the damn time. Our main character, Priest, wanders through the crowd on his way to confession. There, the confession booth takes a reading of his DNA to confirm who he is, and then brings up the appropriate priest to speak with him. The priest has been having bad dreams lately. The opening scene is one that keeps on haunting him. He confesses that he's worried that this might mean something bad, that maybe vampires are coming back. But typically, the other priest tells him not to worry about it. He spouts some religious dogma and sends the priest on his way.
And remember, to go against the church, to go against God.
The priest arrives home after that, where he finds a random guy lurking outside. Turns out this guy's a sheriff from that town nearby where the attack happened earlier. His name is Hicks, and he's come here for the priest's help.
They took Lucy. Your brother hurt bad.
That family we saw getting attacked, yeah, that's the priest's brother and his wife. Hicks has come here because he intends to track down these vampires and get Lucy back. But he knows he can't do it alone, and apparently when it came to killing vampires, the priest was the best.
So that when it came to killing vampires, you were the best.
But the priest has no choice but to turn Hicks down. There's a religious mandate forbidding priests to hunt down vampires anymore, and to break this mandate would be to go against the church. Obviously, a guy whose name is literally Priest can't do it, but how he wants to. In an act of desperation, the priest seeks out the clergy, those that rule in Cathedral City. There he tells them about his niece Lucy and his intention on going out in the wilderness and getting her back. It's a pretty decent excuse, to be honest. You would think that the clergy would happily grant it, only they don't. It's a bunch of old men well past their use-by date. They're convinced that vampires are eradicated, and that there's no need to go on this expedition.
I am begging you.
Even worse, they tell him that if he disobeys them, they will not only kick him out of the priesthood, but out of the city entirely, which basically means death.
You will be stripped from the order.
The priest tells him that he understands completely and that he'll obey, although anyone who's ever seen a movie knows that that promise is begging to be broken. Meanwhile, we cut to Lucy, who has indeed been taken prisoner. She's locked in a cage, looking terrified, but that fear only increases when our movie's villain, Black Hat, wanders into the frame looking all menacing.
He'll come after me.
He's that priest from the first scene, the one we saw getting taken by the vampires. He doesn't tell us yet what's going on, just that he kidnapped Lucy because he wants the priest to come after him. After his rejection, the priest meets privately with one of the clergy members where he laments the fact that after all his service, the clergy still saw fit to turn him down. He then tells the clergy member that he doesn't give a damn.
I go against God.
And he's going after Lucy regardless. The clergy member saw this coming and orders the guards to capture the priest. But we realize right away that that's not a good idea. The priest dispatches the guards like an adult would pesky toddlers. He then hurries to his bike and rides it from the city and across the desert, away from the small-minded clergy, and hopefully on the way to some serious vampire action. The priest's first stop is his brother's farm. The place is really trashed, but that was always going to be the case. Really, he just stopped by so Hicks could pop up and join.
I'll be damned.
Then they head to the town of Augustine, where the two come across a junk dealer trying to peddle false vampire wards. Hicks kicks him out of town promptly, but the point is made. The people here are scared of vampire attacks, and the city isn't doing anything to help. Up next, they stop at Hicks' home, where the priest's brother, Owen, is still alive. They speak about the priest's past, where it's suggested that he might have been a reluctant recruit, and what's more, it's implied that there's more between him and his niece Lucy than he's letting on right now, but we'll cover that later. After that, the priest and Hicks regroup and prepare to leave the following morning. The priest is carving a bunch of crosses into his bullets as Hicks explains that he's gotten word that the clergy from the city is after Priest and they need to be ready. Priest then tries to shut Hicks out, implying that he's not up to the mission. Well, to shut him up, Hicks shows him some pretty fancy work with a knife. Here, take a look. See? Pretty fancy, right? Priest then asks him how he is with a gun.
You any good with a gun?
Then Priest tells him that's good, because the bullets aren't for him. Priests don't use guns. They're for Hicks. Back to Cathedral City, where the clergy has convened 4 priests together to go out and hunt the priest before he can complete his mission. But the camera lingers on one priest, priestess if you can believe that for a name, so it looks like she might become relevant later on.
Bring him back to me.
In fact, I'd bet on it. It's the next morning, and the hunt is officially on. Priest checks the footprints near where Lucy was taken and notes the human prints among the vampires. Hicks suggests that they might be familiars, but Priest shuts that down as vamps don't take familiars out to hunt.
This was something else.
Their first stop is a reservation called Nightshade. These are walled towns where the last remnants of the vampire population live with their human familiars, but they are greatly weakened and rather pitiful, so they're not the threat they used to be. The two heroes arrive toward the afternoon, take note of the time, and then head on inside. The inside is pretty much exactly what you might expect, like a cheaper version of Mad Max, but with the vampires. These familiars of theirs are human, but they've been fed a pathogen to make them subservient to vampires. They watch over the town at day and then worship the vampires at night. The priest and Hicks wander into the town where they're treated with a very cold welcome.
Not welcome here, priest.
Hicks jumps in asking the familiar about Lucy and the kidnapping, if they've seen anything. The familiar's like, nah, you're barking up the wrong tree. There's no vampires left, and if there were, they didn't come through Nightshade. Now, I don't know about you, but this guy clearly is lying, and the priest thinks so too. Consequently, he and Hicks decide to check out the vampire hive underneath the city. They wade down into the darkness and search, and that's when things get interesting. The familiars jump him, trying to take down Hicks when the priest isn't looking. Hicks barely manages to get out the hive alive, but now he's out in the open, surrounded by half a dozen familiars who are looking hungry. Enter the priest.
Save your bullets.
It's now that we see why the priests were so damn deadly. They have super speed, super strength, and the priest makes short work of these familiars. But then just when he's about to question the last familiar, the sun goes down and now he's got a bunch of vampires to deal with. The vampires surround the priest and attack, but he's got a few tricks up his sleeve. Most involve heavy CGI and creative editing, but it gets the job done, and without even breaking a sweat. The priest takes them all down. Oh, and Hicks manages to get 1 or 2 shots off, so good for him. The familiar breaks almost right away, tells the priest that there's an army of vampires and they took the girl west to the main hive of Solamira.
You have no idea what coming, priest.
Meanwhile, Black Hat's meeting with the con man from earlier. He just wants to find out if the priest is following him or not. And when he finds out what he wants, well, here, take a look. Yeah, eats him. How grateful.
There's your company.
compensation.
Priest and Hicks reach that hive, but before they go in, they do a little bonding, mostly over how much Hicks is in love with Lucy. He regrets that he wasn't able to save her, and promises that he's gonna make it up for it right now. He then asks the priest if he'll kill Lucy if she's been bitten, and the priest is like, yeah, yes I will. Hicks isn't happy about that. But enough of that. The sun is dropping and the two have a vampire hive to scout. They climb inside the hive, and learn right away that it's empty, as they thought it'd be. The vampires were killed out generations ago after all. Priest tells Hicks to wait behind so he can scout further, and seeing as Hicks can't jump off a 100 tall foot cliff without dying, he really doesn't have a choice. The priest wades through the empty hive, only it isn't empty. A shadow moves behind the priest. He hears footsteps. A quick jump scare and he's wrestling whoever's in there with him, only to find out that it's Priestess. She's tracked him here alone, but not to kill him, to warn him.
They sent 4 of us to track you.
She can't believe that the priest broke his vow, but he tells her that he had no choice. She's about to follow up when they hear gunshots coming from deep within the hive. Hicks! They hurry to find out where he is and see that he's come across a hive guardian that has a bit of a temper. These scary monsters are as big as bears and twice as aggressive, which means that we're about to get a pretty cool action scene. And we do. The priest and priestess team up together to take the hive guardian down. It's tough at first, as that thing's strong and powerful and having a real bad day. But then priest defies gravity a little bit and we get a very cool moment. Yo, check it out. See? Told you. The priest skewers that guardian and kills it just enough for Hicks to get off that final shot, so he feels like he helped. With the guardian dead,
Not bad.
the three now wade deeper into that hive. Here we get a little bit more on the priest. We learn that he came to the clergy at an older age than the others, that he was once a normal man, living a normal life until he gave it all up. But enough of that for now. The three find themselves in a newer part of the hive. From the looks of it too, this part of the hive can house thousands of vampires, more than has been seen in generations. It's empty now, but they follow that hive to the end, where it leads them back outside, right in the viewing path of a nearby city which is currently up in flames. We cut down to that city shortly before the attack. A train conductor's chilling in his office when he hears the train arrive. It's a big black monstrosity that's perfect for transporting hungry vampires. And indeed, as the conductor inspects the train, it opens and unleashes hell on that small town. But it's not all bad news. Those other three priests sent out to hunt the main one just happen to be in this town, and right away they run into the leader of the vamps. Black Hat. They do an Old West style stare down and then one of the priests charges him, doing a whole bunch of spin kicks and fancy moves that is sure to confuse Black Hat. Nah, he punches forward and tears his heart right out of his chest. He then looks to the other two and makes an offer. Join me or join your dead friend.
You could follow in my footsteps.
Not much of a choice, to be honest. They arrive at the town the next morning, realizing right away that they're too late. Not only are they late, but every single person in the town is well and truly dead. But even worse than that, they have no idea how this could have happened. The question the three of them have now is, how could this have happened?
What kind of vampire could do something like that?
Vampires popping out of nowhere and then vanishing before the sun rises? The answer, the train tracks. They head to those tracks and right away the priest realizes that the train is being used to transport these things. They eye the tracks and the priest asks where the next stop is. With the train full of vamps heading to Cathedral City and no one else to stop them, the priest, priestess, and Hicks realize that it's going to be on them to save the day and hopefully rescue Lucy while they're at it.
It's going to be a massacre.
Before they leave on their final mission, we get quite the scene here of priest and priestess bonding a little more, just so that the last scene has some actual stake. They speak about the power of faith and how important it is to both of them, even after all this time. There's also some subtext that implies these two might be in love, but it isn't really taken any further other than face touching and hand holding. There's also a small moment where Hicks pulls out a gun on the priest and threatens to kill him if he's just gonna kill Lucy. It's meant to be all tense, but we all know that Hicks isn't shooting anyone, especially Priest. And indeed, Priest tells him that if he's dead, no chance of stopping that train and Lucy'll just die anyway.
We ride out and meet this together.
Now that that's all taken care of, we jump into our third act. The train is roaring across the tracks, headed straight for Cathedral City in the distance. If it gets there, all the vampires will be released and unleashed on the city. On the train is Lucy, who they need to rescue from that train before they stop it. There's also Black Hat, who Priest needs to distract while Lucy's rescued. The plan is thus a pretty straightforward one. Hicks is going to go through the train looking for Lucy, and he does this too, riding his bike up the back and pulling off a truly unbelievable jump to board the train. Priest rides up further, climbs up the side, and jumps to the roof where Black Hat's waiting for him. And Priestess rides ahead, overtaking the train and making her way closer to the city so she can blow the tracks. On top of the train, the two are squaring off. It's the first time he's seen this guy since he got taken away all those years ago. Priest is more than a little surprised and sorry at what happened, but Black Hat doesn't seem to mind. In fact, he wants Priest to join him.
Join me.
Together, as powerful as they'd be, they can rule. They can tear down this clergy and set themselves up as leaders. Hell yeah. As expected though, Priest isn't buying it, decides to settle it the old-fashioned way. Fisticuffs. Too bad for him though, cause Blackhat is much stronger than him, and after he toys with him a little, he kicks him across the train and sends him flying from it, or so he thinks. Meanwhile, Priestess rides down the tracks as far away as she can and then stops and sets the bomb on her bike. She gets a little trouble from a group of familiars, but after some praying, she finds the power to take them down.
Strengthen me.
And since priests don't use guns, she does it with some kickflips and punches. As to Hicks, well, he makes it through the carriage to where Lucy is, but by that point, Blackhat's back. And although he puts up an admirable fight for a human, it ends with Hicks literally getting kicked through the wall and off the train. But it's a movie, so the fall doesn't kill him, just grazes the knee a little. Back on the carriage, and Blackhat manages to overpower Priest. He drives a knife through the shoulder and pins him to the wall. And then, just to really rub it in, he reveals to Lucy and the audience that she is in fact the priest's long-lost daughter. No wonder he was so eager to rescue her.
He never told you.
Blackhat sets the carriage alight and leaves the priest to burn, but the power of Christ brings him back to life. He pulls the knife from the shoulder, goes after Blackhat for a final time. It's good timing too, because Blackhat is just about to tear into Lucy's neck when Priest rocks up and spears him with that knife. Another fight breaks out, and although Blackhat again has the advantage and thinks he's gonna win, he doesn't see the priestess coming for him. She rides the center of the tracks right for the train, and with a bomb strapped to her bike, she sends the bike headfirst into that powering train, blowing it up in one awesome display of pyrotechnics. This sees the train erupt in a ball of fire, fly off the tracks, and ultimately kill all the vampires inside in one fell swoop. Hicks too burns up in the fire, while the priest and Lucy manage to jump from that speeding train and somehow land safely on that hard sand floor of a desert. The movie ends with a little vindication. Priest goes back into the city, interrupts a clergy meeting. With him, he has a head of a dead vampire, throws it on the floor for all to see. The head of the clergy doesn't want anything to do with it, calls the priest a liar and a charlatan, and then banishes him from the city. And then,
It's just beginning.
with the clergy still screaming at him, the priest exits the room, and then the city, riding into the sunset on his bike. But we get the sense that it isn't the end for Priest, and the movie is set up perfectly for what I'm sure will be an action-packed sequel. Oh, wait, guess not. And that was it, guys. Thanks for chilling with us on Priest. Produced by Sony Pictures, released back in 2011. Directed by Scott Stewart. Stars Paul Bettany, Cam Gigandet, and Mackie Q. Some pretty cool vampires in here. Which is your favorite on-screen vampire of all time? Let us know with that hashtag Cinema Recap in the comments. As always, till next time.